About a year and a half ago, while my dad and I were playing soccer at a local park, he suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. One moment, he was running the length of the pitch and bending it like Beckham. The next, he was lying unconscious on the ground. Although bystanders and I worked to carry out CPR and deliver mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on the spot, my dad wouldn't have survived if first responders hadn't rapidly arrived to shock him with an automated external defibrillator. Now, this is where my treasure hunt begins, because change comes from discomfort. It turns out that defibrillators like the one that helped save my dad's life are nowhere near universally accessible across the United States. In places where defibrillator mandates do exist, they've primarily been implemented by local levels of government. City councils, county boards, in some cases, state legislatures. This status quo is really indicative of two things. First, statistics and data, which overwhelmingly show that defibrillation significantly improves cardiac arrest victims' survival and brain function retention rates, aren't enough to drive change on their own. Second, it's indicative of the fact that change starts at the local level. So right off the bat, for meaningful change to happen, you have to have a drive for it. A lot of the time, people will tell you that you have to put yourself in the shoes of the decision makers, be they government officials or school administrators or business executives. And that's definitely an important part of the process. But the source of change has to be your drive and your story. And that means that you have to put the decision makers in your shoes. Why do you care? Why, of everything that is imperfect in your neighborhood or your school or your company, is this what you want to fix? Answering these questions takes a lot of internal work, and it requires digging into a difficult past to discover why this particular issue is so important, not just as a question of policy, but to you as a human being. Communicating the why of change is what opens the door to the how. You can't do the research, build a network of supporters, take your costs to the decision makers without it, because it's what actually enables you to articulate your drive. From a psychological perspective, decision makers, and in general, the people you need to convince to back your idea, will identify with your lived experience in a way that reams of data, no matter how accurate or convincing, can't quite inspire. This is actually another power of the why. It brings you to appreciate the human impact of your idea and, in turn, builds a connection between your personal experience and the numbers. Now, this is why it's so critical to start local. In a community close to home, that impact isn't just a question of strengthening your own commitment to change. It's also the pursuit of visible human improvement. That visibility is so important because you can actually see change happen around you. You can talk about your experience in a community that you share with these decision makers, and that means that you can clearly visualize the why and thus move forward towards the how of the journey towards change. Now, for me, that room to make a human impact was room to save hearts, to save lives. My dad's cardiac arrest showed that when somebody's heart stops, every second counts. According to the American Heart Association, a defibrillator shock delivered in the first minute after a cardiac arrest can improve a victim's survival chances up to 90%. So just waiting for 911 to arrive isn't a substitute for making sure that defibrillators are accessible in public spaces. So for me, the first step in taking this idea that I'd worked out inside my head and converting it into change that could actually help other people was finding those decision makers in my community. My search led me to the office of a local Los Angeles City Council member, where I explained the life-saving role a defibrillator had played for my dad and presented some research on current defibrillator availability. That led to a City Council motion getting the ball rolling on funding defibrillator expansion. Now, certainly there were steps between this sort of internal process that I had to go through to come to terms with what had happened to my dad and the city council vote itself, but I don't know that you all signed up to listen to me talk about late nights spent browsing mankind's greatest innovation, Google, for cost information on defibrillators. Now, if you look at individuals who've gotten involved with an idea for change, they all have two things in common: a meaningful personal experience behind the idea they're proposing, and experience in the dirt of their community. That's how any famous activist got started. Look, for example, at Malala Yousafzai. Her fight for education rights for girls and women really needs no introduction. But what isn't brought up about Malala as often is how her global fight started at a local press club and a school youth program. Growing up in the Taliban-controlled Swat Valley in Pakistan, Malala first spoke out about the threat of banning girls from schools to journalists in a nearby city. Her first work to challenge that reality was in local schools, improving students' policy literacy. It was only after these seeds of change, rooted in Malala's story of education in spite of oppression, were planted locally, that her issue came to international attention. Now, there's a very strong scientific basis for sharing personal experiences as a means of persuasion. It's why a biologist will often have to humanize her research to engage a non-expert audience. In the humanities and the public sector, storytelling doesn't just build up grassroots support for an initiative as it does in the sciences. It can also help bring officials over to your point of view. Neuroscience tells us that human beings are wired to understand and connect with struggle. And as Claire Patey from the London Empathy Museum explained in 2016, we actually form stronger bonds with individuals who are vulnerable and have struggled than with whole groups of people. So it's very, very important to recognize how the story you tell about your lived experiences shapes others' perception of your idea for change. This is really what the why is all about. Finding the root of the discomfort and really being brave enough to step outside your comfort zone and share that story with others. The beautiful thing about making change is that you don't have to start in a position of power. I know that my generation cares a lot about Instagram. Indeed, that's how I first found out about this event that was going on in my school. But you don't have to start with a huge online platform or be an influencer to kickstart a meaningful process of change. You just have to care about your idea. Once you figure out how to communicate that idea, the why do I want this change to happen, you build a pretty good argument for how it'll positively affect other people's lives, and from there you have a very strong case to take to whoever the people in positions of power might be in your community. Take it from me. What started in my mind as a hope that people who suffer what my dad suffered would have access to the same life-saving technology he did at that public park is now the subject of an ongoing government report in the second largest city in the United States. So if there's anything you take away from me standing up here, I hope it's that you have the tools to act on the issues you care about. Lean into your discomfort and let it drive you to understand and better articulate your story. Above all, connect with the people around you. Have that conversation. Send that email. Make that phone call. As a society and in our smaller communities, we can only attain the treasure that change promises if we as individuals embark on the hunt to find our shared imperfections, to discover why they matter and why we care, and then to work towards a better future. In other words, to have a heart and to save a heart. You have the power to drive that change and lead us into that better future. Thank you.